On this episode, we get back into Bangkok's 7 deadly sins with a look at greed.
So, if you've ever pondered how greed in Thailand is dealt with and thought of, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, you are listening to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 because the hot girl I asked to the prom told me to get lost, so I did.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a 1-year teaching contract 20 years ago. Fell in love with random Thai guys on the street sitting around card tables offering me cheap whiskey, so I never left.
That's great. I love that. That's truly connecting with the man on the street.
They're so friendly.
Yeah. It happens when you're drunk at 8 in the morning.
Right. A huge thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, which you can find on our website, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about working out, or not working out in Greg's case, during the lockdown, the slow but sure opening up of more businesses, and whether that means Thailand's COVID woes are under control or that we're just used to living with it, and a new semi-regular segment called Weed Watch, where we update our patrons on the latest news in Thailand's quickly evolving marijuana laws. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
Weed watch, man. It's a changing world.
We need it. We need it.
All these kids these days. So, Ed, I think love, loathe, or leave. Recently, one of us picked the long pinky fingernail, which we sometimes see in Thailand. A guy walking around and all of his fingernails are trimmed except the one on his pinky fingernail, which is weirdly long. Yeah.
That's right.
So you were a live with and I was a loathe. But we got a couple of answers from one of our listeners, actually. A couple of them wrote in to try and explain it.
What did they say?
Well, one of our listeners named Gordon in Australia, he wrote in and he said he was sitting in a taxi cab in Singapore one time, and he noticed that his taxi driver had a very long fingernail on his pinky fingers, and he asked him what it was about. And he said this guy had been advised to grow it by a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. He had a problem with anger that had messed up his life, caused major marriage problems, etc. So the traditional Chinese medicine guy said if he grew the nail long, it would serve as a constant and highly visible reminder to bite his tongue when he was about to let loose.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I can believe that. And then our buddy Ans, he wrote in and he said, the history of the pinky fingernail in Thailand can be traced back to the ancient Qing dynasty of China, where the Chinese believed that if you grew your pinky fingernail longer than the last bone joint on the ring finger, it would bring fortune to your life. And it's a belief that the Chinese brought with them when they settled in Thailand.
Oh my God, is that for real?
I don't know, but that does make sense in kind of a Chinese thing, like a feng shui kind of thing, right? Like,
it almost sounds like something that was totally made up. Like you just completely made that up.
Well, when you're a kid, it's like, if you can bend your thumb this way, it means this.
Yeah, no. I believe it. I believe it. That's fascinating. I mean, to me, just drugs didn't seem to be the right thing, but that's the only thing that I associate like one long nail with. So apparently, I guess there's some Chinese culture behind it. That's interesting.
I guess so. I think there's more to it, because if a guy is shoveling cocaine up his nose with a 4-inch long fingernail, you probably don't want to get in that dude's taxi.
That's right. And I don't think it's something taxi drivers could afford anyway. Yeah.
Probably not. That much coke is not going to be good for anyone. Anyway, thanks guys for writing in. That was really interesting. We love it.
No, I appreciate that. That is clarification.
Still, my fingernails are staying trimmed. All right, guys. Well, on this episode, we continue working our way through the 7 deadly sins of Bangkok. So far, we have done lust, pride, and wrath. And this week, we are going to dive into greed and the role it plays in modern Thai culture. Now, before we get into it, this show will likely take a more critical eye towards Thailand, but we want to be clear, we're not saying Thais are greedy, nor are we saying Thai culture is greedy. Greed exists in every country and culture in the world. Even I'm greedy sometimes, especially when it comes to food. And Thailand is no different in this regard. But greed does manifest itself uniquely in different cultures, in the way it's handled, in the way it's talked about, and the way it's addressed. So we're going to just discuss our thoughts on this and maybe read a few things by people who have written about greed in Thailand in the past. So it's an interesting topic to tackle because I'm not sure if, like I said, I'm not sure if there's any specifically Thai things that are greedy. It's just how Thais digest greed, which is common among everyone.
Yeah, I want to interpret the word greed broadly because to me, greed specifically just means like prioritizing making money or wealth over other things. Okay. And and it's very hard to assess that. So to me, when I think of a topic like this, I do think that there is a part of Thai culture, especially Chinese Thai culture, that's very business oriented, that's very open about the desire to make money and get rich, and also kind of showy. And again, I'm trying to keep it real here. I think there is part of modern, especially Chinese Thai culture, which wants to show off wealth, that is kind of ostentatious, whether it's wealthy, whether it's expensive cars or jewelry. I think it's I do think that's a Thai Chinese thing, and again, just like you said in your intro, obviously it exists in other countries as well. But it's just something I noticed. When I first came to Thailand, and I knew it was a so-called developing country, and I was shocked on Sukhumvit Road how many BMWs and Lexuses and expensive cars I saw. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be a developing country. There's like expensive cars. There's expensive cars all over the place. And then, one of my, I believe it was my buddy's Thai girlfriend, I was talking to her and I was like, what's up? And she said, oh, as soon as Thai people get any money, they buy the most expensive car they can. Now, remember, this is probably the first couple of months I was in Thailand. A Thai woman, said, oh yeah, as soon as Thai people get a job and they might lease the car or get a loan to buy the car. But this is one of the first things someone told me, that Thai people, are highly leveraged in their automobiles, and I think it's basically true. I mean, I think the data backs that up. Do you agree?
That reminds me, I'm gonna stick around after the closing music because I'm gonna tell a joke you just reminded me of. Well, I don't know specifically about the cars. I don't think I've experienced that personally. I know a lot of Thai people who are very happy with their Hondas and Toyotas, as am I. But you did make a very astute observation there, and that the one thing that shocked me when I first got here was how cold and clinical Thais were about money. And where I'm from, I'm not sure about you're from. I don't know how broadly this can be interpreted as a Western culture thing, but money it's kind of gauche to talk about money too openly. Like it's kind of tacky to talk about it, right? And it's there's been many girls I've dated, not that many, and it's always been like, if I say like, oh, I got paid for my job today, they would put out their hands like, okay, give me some, right. And it's like, ha ha ha, I'm joking, but actually really I would like some money, like it's a half joke, and it's just they're very upfront with talking about the realities of having money.
I've got some I remember some of my observations when in the first couple years I was here, maybe not the first couple months, for the first couple years, and it was I'd never lived overseas before. I'd never lived in Asia, and I know Thai culture is not the same as Chinese culture, obviously, but especially among the middle class and above Thais in Bangkok, I think there is a strong influence from China. And when I used to teach a lot of before I got my job at my university, I taught a lot of test preparation. So Thai people who were trying to get into either university or graduate school in the States, people taking like the SAT or the GRE or the GMAT. So I did that for years. And so these were all highly motivated, educated Thai people who were very ambitious, trying to get into good schools in the States. And I worked for years on their admissions essays.
Okay.
right? And it was fascinating, the difference, because I did this for a couple years in the States before I moved to Thailand, and I was fascinated by the style of their essays and the way they talked in their essays about their desire to be rich. You know, and again, this is certainly not every student, but I was surprised at the number of students who would just say, you know, I want to be wealthy, or they would say something like, my family is wealthy, my family is rich, and I don't want to let them down. And it's funny because I think you're right that I think at least, and I don't know if it, you know, when I think of American culture, I always tell my students it's very hard to generalize about America because it is diverse. So all I really know is about the Midwest, you know,
Right.
and I think the Midwest in the U.S. has kind of a northern European influence, like a German, Swedish kind of influence. And I don't know, you know, I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff, this kind of cultural stuff, but I think, like you said, it's kind of gauche. It's kind of tacky to just say, I want to be rich. Or you know what I mean? It's not like, I think part of that, at least where I grew up, my Midwestern culture, is you're supposed to be a little more low key about it. Of course, everyone is working their ass off, and everyone is trying to make money. You know, so there's a Protestant work ethic thing going on where people are trying to make money, but the bottom line is you're not supposed to show it off. You know, it's kind of tacky, and I think that I think Chinese culture is a little bit different. I think that they see it as ambition, and I remember one particular kid who wrote a great essay, and it was fascinating because the way he talked about being a successful businessman, it was almost like a religion to him. Like he really wanted to be a successful businessman. And my reaction reading his essay was, he sounded like, to me, like a 19th century like industrialist. Like he was so
Somchai Rockefeller.
seriously, no, he was so capitalistic. And it's funny because, you know, when I first moved here, I didn't, you know, I know that China's not like really communist, right? You know, like really communist, right? But I really didn't know until I moved to Asia 20 years ago that how business oriented Chinese people are. I didn't know that. I did not know that. And so to have this young Chinese Thai guy talking about being rich and running his own company, I was just like, wow, like this guy sounds how I think Americans used to be. Like he was just so pro-capitalism, so motivated to be a successful businessman.
Well,
and I'm not criticizing it. I was just like, wow, like he's just openly talking about his desire to be rich, which I don't remember encountering that in the States. I don't.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that alone is indicative of anything particularly Thai about greed in Thailand, because I mean, you know, think back to Gordon Gekko and the 80s movies Wall Street. You know, greed is good, and
of course it is. You're right. Okay, it is. I'm not saying it's not part of America. I'm not saying greed is not part of American culture. Of course, like we said, it's everywhere, and it's a cliche in America that people are trying to make money. Yeah. But all I'm saying is, where I grew up or where I came from, like you said, it's just. It's just not cool to just be so openly talking about it.
Same as me. I was raised to you know, I'm not motivated by money, which
that's right. Yeah,
probably done a great disservice to me after 45 years.
All I'm saying is I think my point is just this, and you know, maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to get, as always, I'd love listeners to tell me I'm wrong. I think there's something about Chinese Thai culture which is just very open about the desire to be rich. They're just more open. They're just more open about it.
But like that by itself is not uniquely indicative of anything. But you take that along with all of the other little things. Like, for instance, I'm going to read this stat from a Reuters article that says Thai household debt to GDP rose to 83.8%. the highest since 2003 and among highest levels in Asia. So I think that you add that to the pile too. I think that a lot of Thais are really okay with accruing a lot of debt, a lot of personal debt. I remember the story about my friend told me that one of her friends, I don't know all the details, but she had so many credit cards and she was maxed out on all of them that eventually the minimum payment, the cumulative minimum payment for all of her credit cards was more than her salary.
Wow.
And it's just like, how do you get to that point unless you're just like, there was nothing that she was spending it on that she needed. It was all just like the consumerism that is so prevalent in Thai society. You got to have the latest thing, the latest car, the latest phone, the latest bag.
Yeah, I do think, I agreed. I mean, I do think, again, it's true in many places around the world, but I do think kind of the middle class or upper middle class Bangkok culture is very, very superficial. It's very much based on appearances, whether it's having the right car, having the right iPhone, jewelry, expensive bags. I'm always shocked at the number of malls in Bangkok that have the most expensive brands in the world. It's like, again, this is supposed to be a developing country, and there's probably 15 malls in Bangkok that have like a Prada store or like a, I don't even know the brands, like Coach and all that kind of stuff, like luxury goods.
Right.
Like Thai people want luxury, and they want the brand name.
It's the tourists that go to MBK to buy the knockoffs.
Yeah, for real. That's so true. I mean, it's. I've read about this problem of debt before. I do think there's very high levels of consumer debt in Thailand, and I'm sure there's a combination of factors. Some of it maybe, my theory is this Chinese Thai culture, which is fairly materialistic, but I also think a lot of that debt has to do with the agricultural economy. I think 1/3 of Thai workers work in the agricultural sector, and I think that those farmers, I think they accrue a lot of debt. I think it's part of the business model. It's like they have to borrow money to plant the crop. So I think
it's kind of like that everywhere, right?
Yeah. So I think a chunk of that. I'd love to see a breakdown of that household debt and see how much of it is held by farmers or people in the agricultural sector as opposed to Bangkokers.
Right.
I'm kind of curious, but I'm sure the credit card problem is real that you mentioned. I'm sure that's real.
Yeah. Well, and I typed in various combinations of Thailand and greed into Google to see what I could get, and I got a couple of interesting articles here. There's a very interesting article by Yvonne Bowangprasut in the Bangkok Post. This was in November 2019, and she was writing about Ponzi schemes in Thailand. Where you just sort of ask everyone to give you money and they'll make a sort of a percentage of profit back. But she says a good portion of the Thai public continues to get duped by these financial scams, opting to see them through rose-tinted glasses. And then she said the Mamani Ponzi scheme is the most recent case to capture media attention. These two people have been charged with duping 3,000 people and counting out of close to over 1 billion baht.
Wow.
They managed to convincingly make investors believe that they would be getting a 93% return in profits.
Wow.
Now, I'm an idiot when it comes to finance and money and stuff like that, but that would immediately strike me as impossible.
Oh, for sure. This strikes me, yeah. So probably another factor that we could add to the list is financial literacy. So I think there is a problem. I'm kind of curious that I wish I knew more about this, but I've read about these Ponzi schemes, and I know Ponzi schemes are a big problem in Thailand. I've been, it seems like every couple of years there's a new one. But that's the kind of thing that you're supposed to be educated to be suspicious of.
Right. Yeah. And she says, she goes over and covers a few more of these famous Ponzi schemes that have happened throughout history in Thailand. And then she says, fast forward to the present day, and we see that nothing has really changed when it comes to people ignoring the old dictum that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
I am confident nobody plans to fall victim to such scams, but when an insatiable longing for material gain is what you live for in life, there is no saying how gullible you can be when presented with opportunities that are a classic Ponzi scam. So that's a big problem too. So it seems that there's just this like sort of, I don't know, and again, this alone is not unique to Thailand at all. But it's just part of the bigger picture. This desire to make a quick buck, the quick turnaround on an investment or something like that. But we can add to this the corruption that is endemic in Thai culture and Thai society.
True
And
that,
I don't,
yeah.
I don't think it's, anyone's going to be surprised, because whether it's, paying your way out of a parking ticket, or, big infrastructure projects with some T money on the side, or money to get into schools or whatever, like, it's just everywhere. And it's something that I've always said, like, it's really holding Thailand back from its full potential, because there's always someone looking to take a cut. There's always someone that can exploit a situation to get some money out of it, with little regard to how it's going to affect, the long-term effect it's going to have.
Right.
And the story I read from the Los Angeles Times was another example. This isn't corruption, but it's another example of the headline of the article is "Thai Business Swamped by Greed, Violence." And it was a story about this guy that set up a really unique, carefully planned ecotourism company in Bangkok. And, as soon as he got successful, there was a whole bunch of other competing companies that were sort of trashing the environment and being rowdy and sort of destroying all of the groundwork that he had laid to make this a sustainable business.
So kind of like a cash grab, basically.
Yeah, a cash grab thing. And there's just no consideration for the long-term effects it's going to have on the industry or the business or the company or Thailand's reputation, et cetera, et cetera. And finishing off my little rant, Ed, did you know there's actually a museum of corruption in Thailand?
I did not know there was a museum of corruption. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's called the National Museum of Corruption, and it opened about six years ago, I think. Yeah, it's got sculptures that represent some of the major corruption cases that have made headlines in Thailand. And one of the museum officials says, "With this museum, we want people to learn and remember that corruption can be conducted in various forms. As for those who corrupt in any form, this museum reminds them that what they will do will be recorded in a country's historical pages and will never be forgotten."
That's good,
Pretty
I guess.
hardcore.
But yeah, it's something that people who live here just know it's part of the reality. It's something we can add it to the list of Thai problems that people are aware of, and they frequently talk about it getting better, and then it never seems to get better.
Yeah, that's right. Then there's this article from on the Museum of Corruption from Thai Inquirer, where this journalist writes, despite its attractions, the fact that there is a museum dedicated to anti-corruption in Thailand seems profoundly ironic. Museums, per the Encyclopedia Britannica, are dedicated to preserving and interpreting primary evidence of a society's cultural or political consciousness. But what is there to preserve? In Thailand, corruption is a present-day reality made to mean everything and nothing.
Maybe corruption is an art form in Thailand.
It totally is. But
so maybe it deserves a museum. It's an art form.
Yeah. But, and corruption is just one facet of this. Again, corruption exists everywhere in every culture in every country. But, you start adding these things up, and it's interesting to see how Thai culture interprets the whole concept of greed.
Yeah, I still think that there is... I mean, this is maybe a good way to summarize my view, is I just think that there's less immediate negative reaction to someone saying, I want to be rich. I feel like in the U.S., if someone just said, I want to be rich, I feel like they're more likely to get a negative reaction than in Thailand. I think a lot of Thai people, when someone says, I really want to be rich, they look at that as ambition. And of course it is. It means you're going to work hard.
Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Does that make sense? So I think there is this cultural difference. But again, like I said, I grew up in Ohio, and maybe that's my Midwestern, I don't know, Germanic something or other. I'm not sure.
I'm just a simple farm boy from middle of Ohio.
Not a farm boy,
you're right.
Suburban.
Like
Yeah, you know what I mean?
If I said that, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said rich. I'd probably get a talking to like, well, there's more to life than money. And
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I'm curious what our Thai listeners think. If you agree with me, I'm curious.
Yeah. But so to wrap this up, also we cannot forget that foreigners, like we said, are not immune to this. That's why there's this entire industry around scams, because foreigners come here and they see money with their eye. They're like, ooh, I can buy these gems and I can sell them back home for a 500% markup.
That's what they think, right? Yeah.
That's what they think, and they get scammed, and probably some of them now. But it's not, like we said, it's not only a Thai thing, but it's that again is another facet of how Thais sort of digest the concept of greed and corruption and manipulation to benefit financially.
Definitely.
Yeah. And, finally, I wanted to wrap things up by saying years ago, I was doing an interview for a story I was writing, and I was interviewing, I think it was like the Irish consular representative in Thailand or something like that. And I was interviewing for a story, and we were talking about corruption, and I was asking him, like, do you ever get tired of this constant, greed for corruption and backhand payments and stuff like that? And he said, no. He said, every country does it. Every country's the same. But you know what? At least here the weather's warm, and when they ask for a bribe, they have a smile on their face.
All right, that's a good way to wrap up.
Anyway, we hope we haven't sounded offensive or too down on Thai culture. We're not. It's like we say, it happens everywhere, but it's just unique to watch how Thai culture takes it and turns it around and spits it out and makes it, like that article said, both something and nothing.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. And this week it is my turn. So Ed, it is no secret that I am not a fan of foot massage. How about you?
Love it.
Love it? Okay. So I'm going to give you something very specific about the foot massage experience. What do you think when the masseuse brings out that little wooden stick
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Dig into you and grind into your foot?
Well, first, for listeners who have never had it done, they have this kind of metal stick, and they basically just push it into the tips of your toe. They push in the tips of your toes, and it hurts. You and I have talked about this. We did our Thai massage thing when we talked about it. I kind of like it, but it is weird. Like we said, Thai massage, it hurts.
Yeah.
But I end up liking it, and you don't. But I mean, that particular thing, that's one of the of all the painful things they do. That's one of the more painful, depending on how hard they press. I mean,
right.
just imagine like someone taking a stick and pushing it directly into the tip of your toe, like hard. It's like an unusual. Right. It's not a normal thing to happen. So I mean, as long as they don't go too crazy, I'm down with it. I can handle it. It's good. It's part of the whole experience. So, do I love it? I wouldn't say I love it. If it's done right, it's just part of the whole thing. And I love Thai massages. I love traditional Thai massages.
Interesting. No, I'm a loathe on foot massages as it is.
And that wooden stick. That wooden stick is like your.
No, I'm like a loathe to the power of loathe. Like they start jabbing that thing into my soft tissue on the bottom of my foot. Like, get away from me.
They take out this little stick, and you pick up a baseball bat.
That's right. How do you like it? So I'm a mega loathe on this one.
I guess I'm gonna go love. But there is a caveat. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes like they just go crazy, and it's But so I just say like Jep means it hurts, and then they chill out a little bit.
Ed, you should know by now, sometimes love hurts.
That no doubt about that.
That famous poet said that, Def Leppard.
That's great. All right. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Right on. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can chat with us or send us a voice message online, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I am BKK Greg. So thank you for listening, everyone. Stay safe, wear a mask, and see you back here next week.
Definitely.
All right, so three guys die and go to heaven, and the first guy goes to the pearly gates, and the St. Peter, I guess, I forget his name. He says, so how many times did you cheat on your wife? And he's like, none, never, 70 years, and never cheated once. And St. Peter goes, all right, you get a brand new Rolls Royce. So gates open, guy walks in. Second guy, how many times did you cheat on your wife? And he's like, well, there was a couple of times, things got out of hand, maybe 4 or 5 times. And he's like, all right, well, you get sort of like a mid-size Hyundai. So he gives him the keys and he goes in. And the third guy comes in and he says, how many times do you cheat on your wife? And he's like, oh, all the time. Like, I was barely married. I had girlfriends all over the world. And the guy's like, all right, well, here's your little, compact Lada. It's a beat up Russian car. And he gives him his little keys and the guy drives off. So a few weeks go by and the guy in the Lada, like, shaking and trembling down the road. And he pulls up at a traffic light next to the guy in the Rolls Royce. And the guy in the Rolls Royce is crying. And the guy looks over and he goes, hey, buddy, what's the problem? I mean, we're in heaven here. This is paradise. And you've got the best car of all the cars. What's your problem? And the guy says, well, I just saw my wife. She was rolling down the street on a skateboard.